Well, to unpack political events that have been unfolding in the country, we now talk to political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. Professor, thank you very much indeed for your time. We know there's a big event happening tomorrow in KwaZulu-Natal, the ANC celebration of 107th anniversary celebration, as well as the 2019 election manifesto. Let's take a look at the recent poll ahead of the elections. Firstly, now research giant Ipsos polled the ANC at 61% support, really a snapshot, I guess, of voter opinion at the time. We're told it's between October 23rd and December 4th last year. What's your take, firstly, on this poll?
Well, I think it's very much a motion of confidence in President Ramaphosa. What we've heard now in the last number of weeks, actually, and more from people talking about, not in terms of opinion polls, is that there's a very strong support for President Ramaphosa in person. And there's even all sorts of calculations that voters are making in provinces like the Western Cape and Gauteng and others about even splitting their vote. So what we are seeing is very much the national sentiment at the moment. And that sentiment, to a large extent, reflects the popularity of President Ramaphosa.
When the electorate is looking at the ANC, let's look at where does the ANC's strength lie. Is it purely Cyril Ramaphosa or the ANC as a whole?
Well, obviously the ANC's historical legacy plays still a very important role for many people, especially the older generations. The younger generations, I think, are more making a rational choice decision about what will be best for them, for their own futures. But so it is a mix. What we've seen in the past elections, especially the last two elections, is that the ANC's support is becoming stronger or is more prominent in the rural areas. They've lost, especially in 2016, quite a lot of votes in the metropolitan areas. And I think that's going to be the test for the ANC in this election, is to what extent they can recover the support in metropolitan areas, especially in Gauteng. But in the end, when we look at elections of the past, it was very often very much focused on the leadership personalities and not so much about policy matters.
You know, we had a number of political parties coming up of late. We had Patricia de Lille's Good Party. We saw Hlaudi Motsoeneng launching a party. We hear about the ATM now. I mean, we have 285 nationally registered political parties in South Africa. But realistically, which party can challenge the ANC effectively?
Well, there's actually only one party at the moment, and that's the DA. The DA support was at the last election around about 22-23%. The local government election was 26%. Thirdly is obviously the EFF with around about between 6 and 8%, maybe can go up to 10%. So those are the DA is the real only competitive party, and then the EFF is very much behind that. But otherwise, all the other parties are minutely small. Most of them will have received more than 1% or less than 1% support.
I mean, the DA and the EFF and, well, other parties have seemingly worked hard in Parliament to hold the ANC government to account. So will those parties not be rewarded for that?
No, I don't think so. What we are seeing with small parties, opposition parties, is that they are often located within provinces. For example, the IFP is primarily in the KwaZulu-Natal, the UDM primarily in the Eastern Cape, and other parties like the UCDP in the Northwest, for example. And because they are competing as provincial or even regional parties with national parties like the ANC or the DA, that means that it's a very uneven playing field for them. And they might have some... We've seen in 2016 that some of them actually received some substantial support at local level. But the moment it becomes an election about national or provincial government, then they normally disappear.
Professor, talk to us about the trust index, if you will, for the ANC over the years and the current level of trust the electorate has in the governing party.
Well, what we've seen with opinion polls about trust is normally that the trust levels are quite significantly lower than the support given to political parties at the time of elections. And that is not an indication that people don't necessarily look at political parties in terms of their performance, as well as how they believe the quality of leadership is. But it is very much about their historical association with those parties. It is changing, as I said, with the younger generation. And what we are also seeing is the role that political parties are playing, especially the DA, in provinces like the Western Cape, Gauteng, and other places, where some believe that it's necessary for a significantly strong opposition party to play a role. We've seen it in the metros and the coalition governments that emerged there. But to a large extent, there is no direct correlation between the trust that people have for political parties, because political parties in general are not very trustworthy in the public opinion. Other institutions like courts, like the public protector and Chapter 9 institutions have very much higher levels of trust than political parties and politicians.
What about trust in a person, the likes of, I know we touched on this, but the likes of Cyril Ramaphosa? I know, look, politics is largely about persuasion. Is Cyril Ramaphosa key in this regard for the ANC? Is he key for a decisive win for the ANC? I mean, we hear about his Tumamina campaign as head of state, but as an ANC leader, do you think people have trust in him?
I think there are significantly higher levels of trust in him, and maybe one can say more from the urban population and middle-class professionals who see his approach, which is very much an economic approach or a focus on the economy, to be ultimately in their favor or for their benefit. But I think that the unknown factor at this stage is what is happening in the townships. And the places where the service delivery, the quality of service delivery hasn't improved significantly since President Ramaphosa came to power. And what will be the judgment by those persons with regard to the ANC?
Let's just talk a bit about what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal of late. Talk to us about the dynamics or optics, if you will, of having the likes of Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa together in KwaZulu-Natal ahead of the January 8th statement. We've seen a picture of the two smiling in a photograph. What's your reading, Professor?
Well, I think KwaZulu-Natal has become very much a focus point for the ANC, for especially the Ramaphosa leadership. They have seen how with the December 27 election, how the opposition primarily came from KwaZulu-Natal, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, as well as President Zuma. The fact that KwaZulu-Natal is a divided province, or has been in the past, if we look at previous provincial executive elections, for example, there, as well as that it is the battlefield where President Zuma wants to make some impact on this election. I would argue for personal reasons, in order to prevent him being prosecuted as well as being implicated in the state capture commission. And I think he tries to galvanize a lot of opposition, specifically in KwaZulu-Natal, to give him some form of leverage power within the ANC, to say that if I have the key to KwaZulu-Natal in this coming election, then it gives him power to say, but, I need some concessions from your side. It depends ultimately on me as President Zuma in order to give you finally a national majority with the contribution made by KwaZulu-Natal. I think that's behind the scenes what is happening.
I mean, we've seen the former President Jacob Zuma now on Twitter. He has been very vocal on certain issues. What sort of role do you think he is currently playing in politics in South Africa?
I think his influence is to a large extent limited to KwaZulu-Natal. He's not playing a national role so much. He's making comments about, for example, nationalization, but it doesn't have a direct impact on the national debate. I think what inherently in this is there is some form of contestation between him and President Ramaphosa about who's the de facto leader of the ANC. But I think in the case of President Ramaphosa, he has certainly the upper hand at this stage at the national level. In KwaZulu-Natal, the local situation or provincial situation is different. And that is why I think President Zuma will not be able to establish himself again at the national level, especially after the election, because the election gives him the opportunity to play a role with a possible impact on the election. But thereafter, when it goes back to parliamentary politics and the politics of the ANC in general, then he won't have that same impact.
You touched on the inquiry into state capture earlier on. It's set to resume soon. And part of the work of the Commission is to look into what environment actually exists that may or may not have provided fertile ground for state capture. So far, what sort of picture is being painted and what sort of effect is it likely to have on the ANC, if anything?
Well, I think the ANC tried to manage it. I don't think they will say it in public, but I think up to now they tried to manage it by sending persons there who did not open up controversial matters, but rather gave a background about how the Treasury functions, how the Minister of Finance functions, how the government communication and information system functions. So it's more about institutional information that they gave about how government works and how the budget works and decision-making works. But, for example, Minister Pravin Gordhan didn't expose anyone or didn't mention someone by name in order to really open up the situation. And I think it was partly for the reason that the ANC as a party or as a government can become implicated in it. And they try to prevent that from happening.
The party's 2019 election manifesto will be launched in Durban tomorrow. Why KZN and why now? Well,
last year it was in the Eastern Cape. There is a tradition in the ANC that they rotate it every year to another province. But I think what we've just discussed about KwaZulu-Natal partly, I think, would explain why KwaZulu-Natal. I think what President Ramaphosa has in mind is to say that I'm not going to rely on President Zuma to deliver KwaZulu-Natal to the ANC. I'm going to do it myself. So I'm going to go to KwaZulu-Natal, show the support that the ANC as an organization or as a political party has in KwaZulu-Natal, and claim that for myself, and that it is not that President Zuma is in a sense a proxy for the ANC. At the same time, I think the KwaZulu-Natal felt, I would use the word maybe politically alienated by the outcome of the December 2017 National Conference of the ANC. They lost a lot. They don't have any person in the top 6. So I think for the ANC under President Ramaphosa, they want to make a gesture towards the KwaZulu-Natal to say you are still very important for us and you are, therefore, we want to launch our campaign there.
Professor, let's look at multi-party democracy holistically and in general. What would, look, I'm not casting any aspersions on the opposition because we know polls have a margin of error and we'll see what happens when the elections takes place. But what does a weak opposition mean for South African democracy?
Well, I think all of us assume that for democracy to work, there must be a good opposition. It does not always depend on the size of the opposition, but rather the quality of the opposition. So it depends on the quality of members of parliament, the members in the provincial legislatures and at local level. And if they can use the institutions of parliament, for example, questions, the portfolio committees, other procedures, in order to keep the government on their toes. And we've seen in the past with small opposition parties that they can do it. I think what we have seen in the last number of years is that the opposition, also with the use of courts, have become quite effective in order to play a role which they could not play in Parliament, because Parliament, in essence, in the end, is about numbers. So small opposition cannot do it as effectively in Parliament as with how they can do it maybe outside Parliament by using of the courts and other means.
Professor, as always, we do appreciate your insight. Thank you very much indeed for your time as well as your insight. That was Political Analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. Yes?